Growing up, I was always in the shadow of Emily. No matter how hard I tried, how much I accomplished, it never seemed to matter. She was always the one who shone brightest, the perfect daughter, the golden child, the one whose every move was praised and celebrated. And I was just the one who faded into the background, the forgotten child. It wasn't that my parents were bad people. No, they loved me in their own way. But it was clear, from the beginning, that Emily was their focus, their pride, their joy. I tried to understand it, tried to convince myself that it wasn't anything personal, but the older I got, the more it hurt. I remember the time I won the regional science fair in 8th grade. I had worked so hard, stayed up nights researching, building, experimenting. When I finally stood on that stage holding the first place trophy in my hand, I couldn't wait to tell my parents. I imagined the hugs, the praise. But when I got home, there was no grand celebration. No "I'm proud of you" from my mother or father. No cake, no congratulations. Instead, they were sitting at the dinner table, talking about Emily's latest achievement, her flawless performance in the school play, a lead role she had deserved more than anyone else. And as I stood there in silence, trophy in hand, I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough. Then there were the other moments, the small, quiet hurts that accumulated over the years. The birthday parties where Emily got the biggest presents, the vacations where everything seemed to be about her. She was the one they gushed over at family gatherings, the one everyone wanted to talk to, the one they saw as the future. I was nothing more than a footnote in the background. I tried everything to get their attention. I achieved high grades, took part in extracurriculars, even tried to become the perfect daughter they wanted, but nothing ever changed. Every success I had was quickly overshadowed by Emily's. Every achievement I celebrated was met with forced smiles and subtle disappointment. I began to wonder if I was even worthy of their love at all. Then came their anniversary, a day that should have been a celebration of love, of family, but to me, it felt like just another reminder of how little I mattered. As they planned their annual dinner, all eyes would be on Emily again, and I would be nothing more than a guest at my own parents' celebration. But this year was going to be different. I had planned everything meticulously, each detail calculated. This anniversary wasn't going to be like the others. This time, I would be the one who had the power. I had spent years quietly plotting, biding my time. The resentment had built up inside of me until it was all-consuming. I had a plan, a way to finally make them see, finally make them understand how much they had neglected me, how much I had suffered in silence. The stage was set, the moment of reckoning was near, and I would make sure that my parents, Emily, and everyone else who had ever ignored me would never forget this anniversary. It would change everything. The resentment simmered inside me, growing stronger with each passing day. Watching Emily bask in the love and admiration of our parents was like pouring salt into an open wound. It didn't matter what I did or how much I accomplished, Emily's life was always the one that mattered more. She was their perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong, and I was just the one who stood on the sidelines, forgotten, ignored, and every time I saw them celebrate her achievements, my anger only deepened. But I wasn't going to stand by any longer. This anniversary, I was going to make them pay. They had taken everything from me, subtly but unmistakably, over the years. Their favoritism, their unspoken treatment of Emily, as the shining star it had gone on for far too long. This year on their anniversary, I was going to turn everything upside down. I spent weeks thinking about how I could do it, planning every detail meticulously. The revenge had to be perfect, impactful, something that would forever change how my parents saw me, and it had to be something they couldn't ignore. No small gesture would do, it had to be something they couldn't dismiss. A moment so intense it would make them regret every ounce of favoritism they had shown Emily, every single moment they had let me feel invisible. I started by observing. Emily, of course, had no idea what was coming. She was too busy enjoying her spotlight, too wrapped up in the fact that she was the golden girl of the family. I, on the other hand, was watching, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I watched as she smiled brightly at our parents, her every word met with admiration, her every move praised, and I, still invisible in their eyes, felt my bitterness growing. I knew that in order to hurt them in the deepest way, I needed to attack what mattered most, their perfect image. They loved being the family that everyone envied, the loving parents, the perfect marriage, the golden child who could do no wrong. That image was everything to them. So I began to gather information, digging into the secrets they had kept hidden for years. There had to be something that would break their perfect facade, something that would show them just how much they had taken me for granted. I started small. I spent time talking to family members, subtly probing for any details I could use. I discovered things I hadn't expected. My parents, while never openly cruel, had been hiding things, small secrets, buried resentments, and perhaps most important of all, an affair. My father had been unfaithful to my mother several years ago, and though they had worked through it, the stain on their marriage remained. I could feel the power of this knowledge, the weight of it, and the possibility that it could be the one thing that would cause the most damage. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want to just expose a hidden truth. I needed something more. I needed them to understand the depth of the pain I had endured all these years, to realize how their actions had shaped my life. And Emily, she was the key. She had been their perfect child, but I knew something about her that no one else did. There was something dark in her past, a secret that would shatter the image of the flawless daughter they had always held up. As I started to dig deeper into Emily's life, I uncovered the truth I had been searching for. She had been involved in a scandalous relationship with someone my parents had forbidden her to date, a man they disapproved of, a man they would have never approved of for their perfect daughter. This was a revelation that could destroy Emily's image, could ruin her perfect life in front of everyone. It would make her a mere mortal, someone with flaws, someone with secrets. The thought of this knowledge in my hands, ready to be used, filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had the perfect weapon. On their anniversary, I would expose Emily's secret. I would expose it in front of everyone. The family, our friends, and most importantly, my parents. I could already see the look on their faces: shock, disbelief, betrayal. The perfect daughter, the one they had always held in the highest regard, would be revealed as nothing more than a flawed, imperfect human being. But as I prepared for the moment, the weight of my emotions started to settle in. Was I really prepared to go this far? Was this revenge, or was it just a desperate cry for attention? I wrestled with my thoughts: anger, jealousy, and a burning desire for justice. But every time I thought about the years of neglect, the silent hurt I had carried, I knew this was the only way. This was the only thing that would make them see me, truly see me. As the anniversary date grew closer, I sharpened my plan. Emily would attend the celebration, of course, and so would our parents. They would all be there, dressed up, pretending to enjoy the perfect evening. But I would make sure that everything they had built, everything they had spent years constructing, would crumble in an instant. The moment I revealed Emily's secret, their perfect world would shatter, and they would be forced to confront the truth. They would no longer be able to ignore me, no longer be able to pretend that Emily was the only one who mattered. And so, with the plan in motion, I waited for the right moment. The night of their anniversary would be the night everything changed. But even as I steeled myself, a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind questioned whether I could truly go through with it. Could I expose Emily? Could I destroy the perfect image my parents had created for her? The answer, though, was clear. I would do whatever it took. This time it was my turn to be seen. This time it was my time for justice. The stage was set. All that remained was to wait for the moment of reckoning. The evening began just as I had imagined. The perfect facsimile of family unity, the warm glow of candles, the laughter of familiar voices. Our parents' anniversary celebration had all the trappings of success. The table was set beautifully, the food was exquisite, and the guests, in their best attire, mingled and complimented our parents on their decades-long marriage. My mother and father, sitting at the head of the table, basked in the glow of their life's work, their love for each other apparent in the way they looked at one another. Emily, as usual, was the star of the show, her flawless beauty and poised demeanor drawing compliments from every corner of the room. I sat in the background, as I always had, watching them. My heart boiled with every laugh, every exchange of affection that flowed around Emily like a halo of adoration. She was the one they cherished, the one they always celebrated. For years I had lived in her shadow, only briefly stepping into the light when it suited them. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, I had the power to change everything. My plan was simple but devastating. I had carefully crafted every detail, every word, every action. I had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The time had come. As the evening wore on, I noticed the casual ease with which everyone moved around the room. Emily was in the center of attention, laughing at a story, her eyes sparkling as our parents glowed with pride. I clenched my fists under the table, the bitterness rising with each passing minute. My thoughts were consumed with the memory of all those moments I had been overlooked, when my accomplishments had been brushed aside in favor of hers. But now, it was my time to make them see me. I waited until the perfect moment, when the dinner was winding down and everyone was comfortably seated. The champagne had flowed, the music had shifted to a softer tone, and the guests were growing relaxed. That was when I stood. The quiet click of my chair against the floor seemed to draw every eye to me. I could feel the tension in the room shift as the atmosphere became heavier. My parents, noticing the change, looked up from their conversation, their smiles faltering. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice loud enough to capture the attention of the entire room. The murmurs of conversation died down. "What's going on?" Emily's voice, too sweet, almost condescending, echoed in the silence. She looked at me with a raised brow, unaware of the storm about to break. I looked at my parents, my mother's worried eyes, my father's calm exterior, which I knew hid nothing but indifference from me. This was the moment. This was my chance to expose them for what they truly were. My heart raced, but I didn't falter. The years of pain, of being ignored and dismissed, had led to this. With a steady breath, I spoke the words that would tear everything apart. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth. The truth about how perfect your life really is, Emily." I looked directly at her, my gaze cutting through the room. The gasps were audible. People shifted uneasily in their seats. I could feel the weight of their gazes pressing against me, but I held firm. My heart pounded louder, but I didn't let the fear show. Emily blinked, her calm expression faltering for a moment. She knew what was coming. My words had hit their mark, and I watched as the color drained from her face. "You think you've had it all," I continued, my voice growing bolder. "You've had every opportunity, every advantage. But let's talk about the secret you've been hiding, Emily. The one our parents would never admit if they knew the truth." There was a long silence, thick with tension. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. My parents looked at one another, their faces tightening as the realization of what I was about to say hit them. "Remember the boyfriend you weren't allowed to see?" I pressed on, my words now coming out in a rush, fueled by years of resentment. "The one they said was bad news. Well, guess what? You didn't listen to them. You were sneaking around, seeing him behind their backs." I paused, letting the weight of my accusation hang in the air. "You didn't just break their rules. You broke their trust." The room was deathly quiet. The shock in the eyes of the guests was palpable. Emily's face had turned crimson, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. I glanced over at my parents, whose faces had drained of color. My mother was the first to recover, her voice trembling with disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous, Emily. Tell them." But I didn't stop. "Tell them, Emily," I said, my words sharp. "Tell them about the time you lied to their faces, made them believe you were the good daughter, the one who could do no wrong." I looked at them now, the years of silence finally speaking. "It's time you realized just how far your perfect daughter will go to protect her image." There was a long beat before Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "You're out of your mind," she spat, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "This is crazy," I echoed, my voice rising with anger. "What's crazy is how they've always chosen you over me, how every time they praised you, it was at my expense." But even as I said these words, the satisfaction that had been building inside me began to ebb. There was a part of me deep down that felt sick. Had I gone too far? Had I really wanted to expose Emily's secret? Or was this more about me? About the years of being ignored, of being treated like I didn't matter? As the silence stretched on, I could see the cracks forming. Emily was no longer the flawless daughter in their eyes, but in my moment of victory, I felt empty. What had I really gained? The looks of disappointment from my parents, the shocked faces of our guests, it was more than I had bargained for. And then I heard it, a quiet sob. My mother, her face pale, stood from the table, her eyes filled with tears. You've ruined everything." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of her words hit harder than any slap. I had gone too far. The revenge I had planned with such care, with such calculated precision, had backfired. It had shattered everything, but in doing so, it had left me standing amidst the ruins, unsure of what I had truly hoped to achieve. The aftermath of my actions was far worse than I had ever imagined. The carefully constructed walls of the family's perfect facade came crashing down in a flurry of raw emotion. The cold silence that followed my outburst was broken by a flurry of voices yelling, crying, and the harsh clattering of chairs being pushed aside. Emily, her face flushed with humiliation, bolted from the table, her footsteps echoing down the hallway as she fled the scene. I watched her go, and for the first time, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I truly wanted to ruin her like this? To expose her imperfections to the world? And yet, the other part of me, the part that had been ignored for so long, felt a cold sense of satisfaction. But it didn't take long for the tide to turn. Is this how you repay your family? My father's voice, usually calm and collected, was now shaking with fury. His face, red with anger, betrayed the disappointment he had never allowed himself to show before. How could you do this to your sister? To your mother and me? The sting of his words cut deeper than I anticipated. I wanted to scream back, to point out how long I had been treated like a shadow in the family, how Emily was always the golden child. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching the chaos unfold around me. My mother's face was pale, tears glistening in her eyes, as she wiped them away with trembling hands. "I can't believe you would do this on our anniversary," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal she felt. "After everything we've done for you, after everything we've given you." The words sliced through me. They had always made it clear that Emily was their favorite, their shining star, and I had always been the one left in the shadows. But hearing those words, "after everything we've done for you," struck a chord in a way I hadn't expected. I thought I had won by exposing Emily's secret, by making the family finally see what had always been so clear to me. But instead, I had thrown a grenade into the delicate ecosystem we had lived in for so long, and now everything was unraveling. As my parents argued, Emily returned, her face blotchy and her eyes red from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How could you do this to me?" Her voice was low, but it carried all the weight of years of pent-up resentment. "You think you've suffered? You have no idea what it's like to live in a family where nothing you do is ever enough. You think I don't know that you're always trying to tear me down? Well, you succeeded. Congratulations. But you've destroyed everything. Everything." Her words stung, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't deny the truth in them. She was right. I had been so fixated on getting revenge that I hadn't stopped to consider the damage it would do not just to her, but to the entire family. The moment of satisfaction I had hoped for turned into a moment of complete devastation. The room was filled with chaos now. Guests who had previously been mere spectators of the evening's events were now shifting uneasily in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Some of them exchanged awkward glances, not wanting to get involved, but also unwilling to ignore the rawness of the situation. A few of them looked at me with pity, as if I had just made a catastrophic mistake. Others were horrified, unable to process what had just happened. "You've embarrassed all of us," my father spat, his voice low but heavy with accusation. "This was supposed to be a celebration of your mother and me, and you turned it into a spectacle. What the hell is wrong with you?" I wanted to fight back. I wanted to yell at him, to point out every moment when they had ignored me in favor of Emily, when I had been left out of family decisions, when every accomplishment of mine had been overshadowed by hers. But something inside me began to wither as I saw the damage my actions had caused. The guilt and anger swirled inside me, and I felt the weight of their words pressing down on my chest. For all of my planning, for all of my carefully laid out revenge, I had never anticipated how much it would hurt to see them so disappointed in me. I had wanted them to see me, to finally realize the pain I had endured. But instead, I had torn apart the one thing that had kept us all together, the illusion of family unity. My mother's sobs filled the room, louder than anything else. "I don't know how I can look at you after this," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You've hurt us all." I glanced at Emily, who was standing by the door, her arms crossed defensively, as she tried to hold herself together. She was angry, no, enraged, but there was something else behind her anger, something that made my stomach turn. "You've destroyed everything. And for what?" she asked, her voice cold now, devoid of any emotion. "What did you think would happen? You can't undo the past, you know. You've made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." I could see her hurt, her pride shattered by the revelation, and yet I couldn't help but feel a small victory in it. She had been exposed. but the price of that victory had been far steeper than I had ever imagined. As the night stretched on, the tension in the room grew unbearable. My parents, their anniversary shattered, retreated into silence, their anger and disappointment hanging heavily in the air. Guests trickled out one by one, unable to witness the fallout any longer. I stood there, feeling like an outsider at my own home, surrounded by the wreckage of the family I had tried to destroy in my moment of anger. The weight of what I had done began to sink in, and I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And yet, amidst the wreckage, a quiet thought emerged. What had I really wanted? I had thought that exposing Emily's secret would finally make them see me. I had hoped that in their anger, they would finally recognize the pain I had been living with. But what I had done was far worse than I had anticipated. I hadn't just hurt Emily, I had hurt everyone, including myself. As the night came to a close and the last guest left, I found myself standing in the quiet, cold aftermath of my revenge. The house was still, the silence deafening, and I had to face the painful truth. I had won, but in doing so, I had lost everything that mattered. The house felt suffocating, the air thick with the remnants of everything that had unfolded. I stood there, still reeling from the aftermath of my own actions, but the anger inside me hadn't dissipated. In fact, it was only growing. The resentment, the bitterness I had carried for years today, it had reached a boiling point. As I stared at my parents across the room, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. There they were, sitting like strangers, their eyes avoiding mine, the weight of their disappointment hanging in the air. My mother had long stopped crying, her face drained of color, while my father's jaw was set in a hard line, his expression unreadable. But beneath all the anger and hurt, I could see the guilt of fleeting look whenever their eyes met mine. I had to speak up now. This moment couldn't pass without the truth coming to light. My silence had gotten me nowhere. I had been ignored, belittled, passed over time and again, while Emily was praised, showered with love, and given everything on a silver platter. And yet, here I was, the one who had finally snapped, the one who had been pushed to this breaking point. "Do you even understand what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice shaky at first, then gaining strength. "Do you know how much I've suffered, how much I've wanted your attention, your love? I've spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of you, but nothing was ever enough." And Emily, I turned to her, who was standing at the door, arms crossed tightly around herself, eyes hard and defensive. She was always the one who got everything. The praise, the love, the admiration. My words were raw, and they hung in the air between us, as if each one was a weight that had finally been lifted off my chest. "Don't you dare blame this on me," Emily spat, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I didn't ask for this, you know. I didn't ask to be your parents' perfect little angel." Her words were sharp, laced with years of bitterness. "You think it was easy, don't you? That I had everything handed to me on a silver platter? You don't know what it was like, being the one they always expected more from, always comparing me to you, to make me feel like I had to be perfect." The words stung more than I expected. Emily had always been the golden child, and I had always been the one left in the shadows, but I had never thought about how she might have felt. That small admission of her own pain struck me harder than I wanted to admit. I didn't let her see my hesitation. I turned my attention back to my parents, my voice louder now, demanding an answer. "Why was she always chosen over me?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of years of hurt. "Why was I never enough for you? What does that mean for us? For our relationship? Do I mean anything to you at all?" My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. "You were never easy to understand," he muttered, his voice low. "You were always so difficult. You made everything a challenge, and Emily, she was just easier. She didn't need constant reassurance. She didn't demand attention. You made us feel like we were doing something wrong all the time." I felt a deep ache in my chest, as if the words were physically carving into me. So I was the problem. I was the one who was difficult. All this time I had been blamed for wanting love, for needing attention, for trying to show I was worthy of being noticed. "You think I wanted to be difficult?" I snapped, fury rising again. "You think I wanted to feel invisible, to feel like I wasn't good enough? I didn't ask to be pushed aside while you showered Emily with praise. I didn't ask for this. All I wanted was to be seen." There was a long silence after that, the room heavy with the weight of everything I had said. My mother finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes downcast. "We didn't know. We didn't know how much we hurt you. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that it was too late for apologies, too late to fix the damage. But the truth was, hearing her say that, hearing my mother finally admit that she saw my pain, wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. I had wanted an apology, but now that I had one, it felt hollow. Of course you didn't know, I said, my voice bitter. You never bothered to ask. You never cared enough to notice. You just assumed I'd be fine in the background, because you were always too focused on Emily. Always. I turned away, pacing across the room as my anger took hold. It wasn't just about the favoritism. It wasn't just about the jealousy. It was about feeling abandoned, forgotten, left out of a family that I should have belonged to. The more I spoke, the more I realized how long I had buried all of this inside. Emily, standing quietly by the door, suddenly broke the silence. You think I had it easy? She asked, her voice trembling. You think I wanted to be the one they always put on a pedestal, always comparing me to you? I wasn't perfect. I wasn't everything they wanted me to be. And maybe that's why I never felt like I could be myself, either. But I didn't know what you needed, either. I didn't know how much you were hurting. The words hung in the air, and I saw Emily in a new light. Maybe it wasn't just me who had been overlooked. Maybe we had both been victims of the same thing. Our parents' expectations, their love warped into something unhealthy, something that no one could have lived up to. My mother, who had been sitting silently, finally broke into tears again, shaking her head. I never meant to hurt you both. I love you both, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see how much you needed me. I was so focused on making things work, on making everything work, that I neglected you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For a brief moment, I saw the woman who had always been my mother, not the one who had chosen Emily over me, but the one who had been lost, unsure of how to fix the damage she had done. But I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not yet. The wounds ran too deep. Maybe you can fix things with Emily, I said, turning to face her, my voice bitter but resolute. But as for me, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. The room fell silent once more, and the weight of everything that had been said settled on us like a heavy fog. The confrontation had only just begun, but it was clear that this moment would change everything. There was no going back. The damage was done, and all we had left was the mess we had to sift through. The days after the confrontation felt like a slow unraveling of everything I had known. The house was quieter now, the kind of silence that stings like a wound that hasn't fully healed. There was no more pretending, no more masks. What had been buried for years was now out in the open, laid bare for all to see, and there was no going back. I spent hours walking around the house, my mind tangled in a web of confusion, guilt, and, surprisingly, some relief. I had finally spoken my truth, but at what cost? The wreckage was hard to ignore. Emily wasn't speaking to me, not that I blamed her. My parents had tried, in their own way, to apologize, but the damage was already done. Their words, while heartfelt, didn't change the fact that I had felt neglected and overlooked for so long. Would a few tears and empty promises be enough to heal the wounds they had created? In the days following the anniversary, I received more than one phone call from my mother. At first, I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every time I heard her voice, I felt the anger rise again, a tight knot in my chest. But finally, one evening, I answered. It was a simple hello, but the crack in her voice spoke volumes. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "I want to make things right, but I understand if you're not ready." There was a time, not so long ago, when I would have jumped at the chance to repair things. But now, I wasn't sure what to do. The cracks in our relationship ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her. "I don't know, Mom," I answered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, or if I even want to." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't expect you to forget, but I hope we can start rebuilding. One step at a time." I put the phone down after a few more words, a pit forming in my stomach. The decision wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. The truth was, my parents had always loved me in their way, but it had never been enough. Love shouldn't feel like a competition. But that's what it had been, Emily winning their affection while I fought for scraps. My heart still ached from the years of neglect. I couldn't undo the past, but I realized I could choose what I did with the future. The hardest part was coming to terms with the aftermath of my actions. The revenge, The sabotage of their anniversary, it had brought me satisfaction in the moment. Yes, but now, standing in the wreckage of everything, I couldn't help but wonder if it had been worth it. Had it really changed anything? Or had I only made things worse? I sat on the edge of my bed, reflecting on the anger that had pushed me to act. My thoughts turned to Emily. It wasn't just about the favoritism. It wasn't just about me. She had been carrying her own burdens too, even if I hadn't seen it before. Maybe her perfection wasn't her choice. Maybe she was just as lost as I had been. I picked up my phone again and sent her a message. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk? I didn't expect a reply, but I needed to try. I needed to take some responsibility for what had happened. My actions had come from a place of hurt, but that didn't excuse them. If I wanted to rebuild what had been broken, I had to own my part in it. A few days later, Emily responded, I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll think about it. It wasn't an answer, but it was a start. As for my parents, they weren't perfect, and I didn't expect them to be. Their attempt at mending things felt like a hollow gesture sometimes, but they were trying, and that was more than they had ever done before. It didn't change the years of emotional neglect, but it did give me something to work with. I met my mother for coffee a week after the confrontation. I had agreed to see her, but the air between us was thick with tension. I could tell she was nervous, but I was too. This wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to be, but I had to know if there was a way forward. I don't know what to do with you anymore, she admitted as she took a sip of her coffee. I've made so many mistakes, and I've hurt you so much. I never meant to. I thought I was doing what was best, but now I see that I was just pushing you away. The pain in her voice was real, and I had to admit, part of me softened. I wanted you to love me, I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper, but I never felt like I could be enough. I was always trying to be what you wanted me to be, but I couldn't get it right. It hurt. It still hurts. She nodded, her face crumpling as she wiped away a tear. I'm so sorry, darling. I never meant for you to feel that way. Please know that you were always enough. I was lost, and I lost you in the process. There it was an apology, but I knew it wasn't enough to erase the years of damage. I had to decide now if I could move forward with them, if I could truly forgive and rebuild, or if I had to sever ties and find my own peace, away from the toxic environment they had created. The weight of that decision sat heavy on my chest. I didn't have the answer right away, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to choose peace, even if that meant setting boundaries. Days passed, and slowly, I started to heal. The anger didn't disappear overnight, but I began to let go of the resentment. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive them fully, but I knew I could forgive myself. I didn't have to keep holding on to the pain. The phone calls with my parents became more frequent. Emily, too, started reaching out, though cautiously. There was still distance between us, but it was a start. I learned that sometimes healing doesn't happen in one grand moment. It happens in small, quiet decisions to move forward, even when the past weighs heavily. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I had the courage to walk away from the pain, to set boundaries where there had been none before. And for the first time I felt like I was in control of my own life. Maybe I could never undo the past, but I could choose how to live in the future. And that was enough.